Good morning and welcome back to Reading Wikis for You, where we read the wikis for you. And today we're going to be reading about the Camino de Santiago, a pilgrimage network across Western Europe that I recently found out about on my trip to Europe. So, with that said, make sure while I'm reading, drop a comment down below. I'd love to hear what you'd like to hear about next. So, let's get started. The Camino de Santiago, or the Way of St. James in English, is a network of pilgrims' ways or pilgrimages leading to the shrine of the Apostle James in the Cathedral of Santiago de Compostela in Galicia in northwestern Spain, where tradition holds that the remains of the apostle are buried. Pilgrims follow its routes as a form of spiritual path or retreat for their spiritual growth. It is also popular with hikers, cyclists, and organized tour groups. Created and established in the beginning of the 9th century, following the discovery of the relics of St. James the Great, the Way of St. James became a major pilgrimage route of medieval Christianity from the 10th century onwards. Following the end of the Granada War in 1492, under the reign of the Catholic monarchs Ferdinand II of Aragon and Isabella I of Castile, Pope Alexander VI officially declared the Camino de Santiago to be one of the three great pilgrimages of Christendom, along with Jerusalem and the Via Francigena to Rome. In 1987, the Camino, which encompasses several routes in Spain, France, and Portugal, was declared the first cultural route of the Council of Europe. Since 2013, the Camino has attracted more than 200,000 pilgrims each year, with an annual growth rate of more than 10%. Pilgrims come mainly on foot and often from nearby cities, requiring several days of walking to reach Santiago. The French Way gathers 2/3 of the walkers, but other minor routes are experiencing a growth in popularity. The French Way and the northern routes in Spain were inscribed on the UNESCO World Heritage List, followed by the routes in France in 1998, because of their historical significance for Christianity as a major pilgrimage route and their testimony to the exchange of ideas and cultures across the routes. Major Christian pilgrimage route. The Way of St. James was one of the most important Christian pilgrimages during the later Middle Ages, and a pilgrimage route on which a plenary indulgence could be earned. Other major pilgrimage routes include the Via Francigena to Rome and the pilgrimage to Jerusalem. Legend holds that St. James's remains were carried by boat from Jerusalem to northern Spain, where he was buried in what is now the city of Santiago de Compostela. According to Spanish legends, St. James had spent time preaching the gospel in Spain, but returned to Judea upon seeing a vision of the Virgin Mary on the bank of the Ebro River. Pilgrims on the way can take one of dozens of pilgrimage routes to the Santiago de Compostela. Traditionally, as with most pilgrimages, the Way of St. James begins at one's home and ends at the pilgrimage site. However, a few of the routes are considered main ones. During the Middle Ages, the route was highly traveled. However, the Black Death, the Protestant Reformation, and political unrest in the 16th century Europe led to its decline. Whenever St. James's Day, the 25th of July, falls on a Sunday, the cathedral declares a holy year, not to be confused with a Jubilee year, which is celebrated every 25 or 50 years, with extraordinary jubilees in addition depending on need. Depending on leap years, holy years occur in 5, 6, and 11-year intervals. The most recent were 1993, 1999, 2004, 2010, and 2021. The next will be in 2027. Pre-Christian history. The main pilgrimage route to Santiago follows an earlier Roman trade route, which continues to the Atlantic coast of Galicia, ending at Cape Finisterre. Although it is known today that Cape Finisterre, Spain's westernmost point, is not the westernmost point of Europe, Cabo da Roca in Portugal is farther west. The fact that the Romans called it Finisterre, literally the end of the world or land's end in Latin, indicates that they viewed it as such. At night, the Milky Way overhead seems to point the way, so the route acquired the nickname Voie lactée, or the Milky Way in French. Scallop symbol. The scallop shell, often found on the shores in Galicia, has long been the symbol of the Camino de Santiago. Over the centuries, the scallop shell has taken on a variety of meanings, metaphorical, practical, and mythical, even if its relevance may have actually derived from the desire of pilgrims to take home a souvenir. One myth says that after James's death, his body was transported by a ship piloted by an angel back to the Iberian Peninsula to be buried in what is now Liberdon. As the ship approached land, the wedding of the daughter of Queen Lupa was taking place on shore. The young groom was on horseback, and upon seeing the ship's approach, his horse got spooked, and horse and rider plunged into the sea. Through miraculous intervention, the horse and rider emerged from the water alive, covered in seashells. From its connection to the Camino, the scallop shell came to represent pilgrimage, both to a specific shrine as well as to heaven, recalling Hebrews 11:13, identifying that Christians, quote, are pilgrims and strangers on the earth, unquote. The scallop shell symbol is used as a way marker on the Camino, and is commonly seen on pilgrims themselves, who are thereby identified as pilgrims. During the medieval period, the shell was more a proof of completion than a symbol worn during the pilgrimage. The pilgrim's staff is a walking stick used by some pilgrims on the way to the shrine of Santiago de Compostela in Spain. Generally, the stick has a hook so that something may be hung from it. It may have a crosspiece. The usual form of representation is with a hook, but in some the hook is absent. The pilgrim staff is represented under different forms and is referred to using different names, e.g. a pilgrim's crutch, a crutch staff. The crutch, perhaps, should be represented with the transverse piece on the top of the staff like the letter T instead of across it. Medieval route history. The earliest records of visits paid to the shrine at Santiago de Compostela date from the 9th century. In the time of the Kingdom of Asturias and Galicia, the pilgrimage to the shrine became the most renowned medieval pilgrimage, and it became customary for those who returned from Compostela to carry back with them a Galician scallop shell as proof of their completion of the journey. This practice gradually led to the scallop shell becoming the badge of a pilgrim. The earliest recorded pilgrims from beyond the Pyrenees visited the shrine in the middle of the 11th century, but it seems that it was not until a century later that large numbers of pilgrims from abroad were regularly journeying there. The earliest records of pilgrims that arrived from England belong to the period between 1092 and 1105. However, by the early 12th century, the pilgrimage had become a highly organized affair. One of the great proponents of the pilgrimage in the 12th century was Pope Calixtus II, who started the Compostelian Holy Years. The daily needs of the pilgrims on their way to and from Compostela were met by a series of hospitals. Indeed, these institutions contributed to the development of the modern concept of hospital. Some Spanish towns still bear the name, such as Hospital de Obrigo. The hospitals were often staffed by Catholic orders and under royal protection. Donations were encouraged, but many poorer pilgrims had few clothes and poor health, often barely getting to the next hospital. Due to this, Maria Ramirez de Medrano founded one of the earliest hospitals of San Juan de Acre in Navarrete and a commandery for the protection of pilgrims on the Compostela route. Romanesque architecture, a new genre of ecclesiastical architecture, was designed with massive archways to cope with huge crowds of the devout. There was also the sale of the now familiar paraphernalia of tourism, such as badges and souvenirs. Pilgrims often prayed to Saint Roch, whose numerous depictions with the cross of St. James can still be seen along the way. On the Camino, the cross is often seen with a pilgrim's scallop to mark the way of the pilgrimage. The pilgrimage route to Santiago de Compostela was made possible by the protection and freedom provided by the Kingdom of France, from which the majority of pilgrims originated. Enterprising French, including Gascons and other peoples not under the French crown, settled in towns along the pilgrimage routes, where their names appear in the archives. The pilgrims were tended by people like Domingo de la Calzada, who was later recognized as a saint. Pilgrims walked the way of St. James, often for months, and occasionally years at a time, to arrive at the great church in the main square of Compostela and pay homage to St. James. Many arrived with very little due to illness or robbery or both. Traditionally, pilgrims lay their hands on the pillar just inside the doorway of the cathedral, and so many now have done this that it has visibly worn away the stone. The popular Spanish name for the astronomical Milky Way is El Camino de Santiago. According to a common medieval legend, the Milky Way was formed from the dust raised by the traveling pilgrims. First official guidebook. The official guide in those times was the Codex Calixtinus, published around 1140. The fifth book of the Codex is still considered the definitive source for many modern guidebooks. 4 pilgrimage routes listed in the Codex originate in France and converge at Puente de la Reina. From there, a well-defined route crosses northern Spain, linking Burgos, Carrión de los Condes, Sahagún, León, Astorga, and Compostela. Legends of the discovery of the tomb of St. James. Another legend states that when a hermit saw a bright star shining over a hillside near San Fis de Solovio, he informed the bishop of Iria Flavia, who found a grave at the site with 3 bodies inside, one of which he asserted was that of St. James. Subsequently, the location was called the Field of the Star, Compostele, corrupted to Compostela. Another origin myth mentioned in Book 4 of the Book of St. James relates how the saint appeared in a dream to Charlemagne, urging him to liberate his tomb from the Moors and showing him the direction to follow by the route of the Milky Way. Pilgrimage as penance. The Church employed and employs rituals, the sacrament of confession, that can lead to the imposition by a priest of penance, through which the sinner atones for his or her sins. Pilgrimages were deemed to be a suitable form of expiation for sin, and long pilgrimages would be imposed as penance for various serious sins. As noted in the Catholic Encyclopedia, quote, "In the registers of the Inquisition at Carcassonne, we find the 4 following places noted as being the centers of the greater pilgrimages to be imposed as penances for the graver crimes: the tombs of the apostles at Rome, the shrine of St. James at Compostela, St. Thomas's body at Canterbury, and the relics of the 3 kings at Cologne," unquote. Pilgrimages could also be imposed as judicial punishment for crime, a practice that is still occasionally used today. For example, a tradition in Flanders persists of pardoning and releasing 1 prisoner every year, under the condition that, accompanied by a guard, the prisoner walks to Santiago wearing a heavy backpack. Enlightenment era. During the American Revolution, John Adams, who would become the 2nd President of the United States, was ordered by Congress to go to Paris to obtain funds for the cause. His ship started leaking and he disembarked with his 2 sons at Finisterre in 1779. From there, he proceeded to follow the way of St. James in the reverse direction of the pilgrim's route, in order to get to Paris overland. He did not stop to visit Santiago, which he later regretted. In his autobiography, Adams described the customs and lodgings afforded to St. James's pilgrims in the 18th century, and he recounted the legend as it was told to him. Quote, "I have always regretted that we could not find time to make a pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela. We were informed that the original of this shrine and temple of Santiago was this: a certain shepherd saw a bright light and there in the night. Afterwards it was revealed to an archbishop that St. James was buried there. This laid the foundation of a church, and they have built an altar on the spot where the shepherd saw the light. In the time of the Moors, the people made a vow that if the Moors should be driven from this country, they would give a certain portion of the income of their lands to St. James. The Moors were defeated and expelled, and it was reported and believed that St. James was in the battle and fought with a drawn sword at the head of the Spanish troops on horseback. The people, believing that they owed the victory to the saint, very cheerfully fulfilled their vows by paying the tribute. Upon the supposition that this is the place of the sepulchre of St. James, there are great numbers of pilgrims who visit it every year from France, Spain, Italy, and other parts of Europe, many of them on foot." Unquote. Modern-day pilgrimage. Although it is commonly believed that the pilgrimage to Santiago has continued without interruption since the Middle Ages, few modern pilgrimages antedate the 1957 publication of Irish Hispanist and traveler Walter Starkey's The Road to Santiago. The revival of the pilgrimage was supported by the Spanish government of Francisco Franco, much inclined to promote Spain's Catholic history. Quote, It has been only recently, 1990s, that the pilgrimage to Santiago regained the popularity it had in the Middle Ages," unquote. Since then, hundreds of thousands, over 300,000 in 2017, of Christian pilgrims and many others set out each year from their homes or from popular starting points across Europe to make their way to Santiago de Compostela. Most travel by foot, some by bicycle, and some even travel as their medieval counterparts did, on horseback or by donkey. In addition to those undertaking a religious pilgrimage, many are hikers who walk the route for travel or sport, along with an interest in exploring their own relationship with themselves, other people, nature, and what they perceive as being sacred. Also, many consider the experience a spiritual retreat from modern life. Routes. Here, only a few routes are named. For a complete list of all the routes, traditional in Leso, see Camino de Santiago route descriptions. The Camino Frances, or French Way, is the most popular. The Via Regia is the last portion of the Camino Frances. Historically, because of the Codex Calixtinus, most pilgrims come from France, typically from Arles, Le Puy, Paris, Vézelay, and some from St. Giles. Cluny, site of the celebrated medieval abbey, was another important rallying point for pilgrims, and in 2002, it was integrated into the official European pilgrimage route linking Vézelay and Le Puy. Most Spanish consider the French border in the Pyrenees the natural starting point. By far the most common modern starting point on the Camino Francés is Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port on the French side of the Pyrenees, with Roncesvalles on the Spanish side also being popular. The distance from Roncesvalles to Santiago de Compostela through León is about 800 kilometers or 500 miles. The Camino Primitivo, or original way, is the oldest route to Santiago de Compostela, first taken in the 9th century, which begins in Oviedo. It is 320 kilometers or 199 miles long. Camino Portugués, or Portuguese way, which is the second most popular route, starting at the cathedral in Lisbon for a total of about 610 kilometers, or at the cathedral in Porto in the North Portugal for a total of about 227 kilometers, and crossing into Galicia at Valença. The Camino del Norte, or Northern Way, is also less traveled and starts in the Basque city of Irún, on the border with France, or sometimes in San Sebastián. It is a less popular route because of its changes in elevation, whereas the Camino Francés is mostly flat. The route follows the coast along the Bay of Biscay until it nears Santiago, though it does not pass through as many historic points of interest as the Camino Francés. It has cooler summer weather. The route is believed to have been first used by pilgrims to avoid traveling through the territories occupied by the Muslims in the Middle Ages. From Irún, the path is 817 kilometers or 508 miles long. The Central European Camino was revived after the fall of the Berlin Wall. Medieval routes Camino Baltico and the Via Regia in Poland pass through present-day Poland, reach as far north as the Baltic states, taking in Vilnius, and eastwards to present-day Ukraine and take in Lviv, Sandomierz, and Krakow. Accommodation. In Spain, France, and Portugal, pilgrims' hostels with beds and dormitories provide overnight accommodation for pilgrims who hold a credencial. In Spain, this type of accommodation is called a refugio or albergue, both of which are similar to youth hostels or hostelries in the French system of gîtes d'étape. Hostels may be run by a local parish, the local council, private owners, or pilgrims associations. Occasionally, these refugios are located in monasteries, such as the one in the monastery of San Julián de Samos that is run by monks, and the one in Santiago de Compostela. The final hostel on the route is the famous Hostal de los Reyes Católicos, which lies in the Plaza del Obradorio across the cathedral. It was originally constructed as hospice and hospital for pilgrims by Queen Isabella I of Castile and King Ferdinand II of Aragon, the Catholic monarchs. Today it is a luxury 5-star Parador hotel, which still provides free services to a limited number of pilgrims daily. Credencial, or pilgrim's passport. Most pilgrims purchase and carry a document called the credencial, which gives access to overnight accommodation along the route. Also known as the pilgrim's passport, the credencial is stamped with the official St. James stamp of each town or refugio at which the pilgrim has stayed. It provides pilgrims with a record of where they ate or slept and serves as proof to the pilgrim's office in Santiago that the journey was accomplished according to an official route, and thus that the pilgrim qualifies to receive a Compostela, certificate of completion of the pilgrimage. Compostela. The Compostela is a certificate of accomplishment given to pilgrims on completing the way. To earn the Compostela, one needs to walk a minimum of 100 kilometers or cycle at least 200 kilometers. In practice, for walkers, the closest convenient point to start is Sarria, as it has a good bus and rail connections to other places in Spain. Pilgrims arriving in Santiago de Compostela who have walked at least the last 100 kilometers or cycled 200 kilometers to get there, as indicated on their credencial, and who state that their motivation was at least partly religious, are eligible for the Compostela from the Pilgrim's Office on Santiago. The Compostela has been indulgent since the early Middle Ages and remains so to this day during holy years. The English translation reads, "The chapter of this Holy Apostolic and Metropolitan Church of Compostela, guardian of the seal of the altar of the Blessed Apostle James, in order that it may provide authentic certificates of visitation to all the faithful and to pilgrims from all over the earth who come with devout affection or for the sake of a vow to the shrine of our Apostle St. James, the patron and protector of Spain, hereby makes known to each and all who shall inspect this present document that name, has visited this most sacred temple for the sake of pious devotion. As a faithful witness of these things, I confer upon him or her the present document, authenticated by the seal of the same holy church, given at Compostela on the day of the month in the year of the Lord year. Deputy Canon for Pilgrims. The simpler certificate of completion in Spanish for those with non-religious motivation reads, La SAMI Catedral de Santiago de Compostela le expresa su venida cordial a la tumba apostólica de Santiago el Mayor y desea que el Santo Apóstol le conceda con abundancia las gracias de la peregrinación. English translation. The Holy Apostolic Metropolitan Cathedral of Santiago de Compostela expresses its warm welcome to the tomb of the Apostle of St. James the Greater and wishes that the Holy Apostle may grant you in abundance the graces of the pilgrimage. The Pilgrims Office gives more than 100,000 Compostelas each year to pilgrims from more than 100 countries. However, the requirements to earn a Compostela ensure that not everyone who walks on the Camino receives one. The requirements for receiving Compostela are 1. Make the pilgrimage for religious, spiritual reasons, or at least have an attitude of search. 2. Do the last 100 kilometers on foot or horseback, or the last 200 kilometers by bicycle. 3. Collect a certain number of stamps on a credencial. Pilgrim's Mass. A Pilgrim's Mass is held in the Cathedral of Santiago de Compostela each day at noon and 7:30 p.m. Pilgrims who receive the Compostela the day before have their countries of origin and the starting point of their pilgrimage announced at the Mass. The Botafumeiro, one of the largest censers in the world, is operated during certain solemnities and on every Friday except Good Friday at 7:30 p.m. Priests administer the sacrament of penance or confession in many languages. In the holy year of 2010, the Pilgrim's Mass was exceptionally held 4 times a day at 10 a.m., 12 p.m., 6 p.m., and 7:30 p.m., catering for the greater number of pilgrims arriving in the holy year. Pilgrimage as tourism. The Xunta de Galicia, Galicia's regional government, promotes the way as a tourist activity, particularly in Holy Compostela years, when 25th of July falls on a Sunday. Following Galicia's investment and advertising campaign for the holy year of 1993, the number of pilgrims completing the route has been steadily rising. The most recent holy year occurred in 2021, 11 years after the last holy year of 2010. The next holy year pilgrimage will occur in 2027. Statistics. The Pilgrims Office publishes statistics regarding pilgrims who got the certificate of accomplishment. In 2024, the most popular routes were the Francés, 47%, Portuguese, 19%, Portuguese Costa, 15%, Inglés, 5.6%, Primitivo, 4.9%, and Norte, 4.3%. Most pilgrims had a Spanish nationality, 44%, followed by U.S. Americans, 8%, Italians, 6%, Germans, 4.9%, and Portuguese, 4.6%. Most pilgrims started in Sarria, 32%, Tui Valença, 11.3%, Porto, 10.5%, Saint Jean Pied de Port, 6.9%, and Ferrol, 5.7%. 93% do the journey on foot and 44.6% by bike. The months in which most pilgrims finish their journey in Santiago de Compostela are May to September. In film, television, and literature. Selected literature. Kinds of Water, Anne Carson, 1987. The Pilgrimage, Paulo Coelho, 1987. The Pillars of the Earth, Ken Follett, 1989. The Sun Also Rises, Ernest Hemingway, 1926. Off the Road, a modern-day walk down the Pilgrim's Route into Spain, Jack Hitt, 1994. I'm Off Then, Losing and Finding Myself on the Camino de Santiago, Hape Kerkeling, 2009. Therapy, David Lodge, 1995. The Camino, A Journey of the Spirit, Shirley MacLaine, 2001. Walking with Sam, A Father, a Son, and 500 Miles Across Spain, Andrew McCarthy, 2023. Iberia, James Michener, 1968. Spanish Steps, The Travels with My Donkey, Tim Moore, 2004. Roads to Santiago, Sees Nootboom, 1996. Pilgrimage to the End of the World, The Road to Santiago de Compostela, Conrad Rudolph, 2004. Two Steps Forward, Graham Simpson and Buist, 2017. The Road to Santiago, E.P. Dutton and Company, Incorporated, Walter Starkey, 1957. Santiago, Many Rivers Press, David White, May 2012. Other, chronological. The pilgrimage is central to the plot of the film The Milky Way, 1969, directed by surrealist Luis Buñuel. It is intended to critique the Catholic Church as the modern pilgrims encounter various manifestations of Catholic dogma and heresy. The Naked Pilgrim, 2003, documents the journey of art critic and journalist Brian Sewell to Santiago de Compostela's for the UK's Channel 5. Traveling by car along the French route, he visited many towns and cities on the way, including Paris, Chartres, Roncesvalles, Burgos, León, and Fromista. Sewell, a lapsed Catholic, was moved by the stories of other pilgrims and by the sights he saw. The series climaxed with Sewell's emotional response to the Mass at Compostela. The Way of St. James was the central feature of the film Saint Jacques Le Mec, 2005, directed by Colleen Serrault. In The Way, 2010, written and directed by Emilio Estevez, Martin Sheen learns that his son, Estevez, has died early along the route, and takes up the pilgrimage in order to complete it on the son's behalf. The film was presented at the Toronto International Film Festival in September 2010 and premiered in Santiago in November 2010. On his PBS Travel Europe television series, Rick Steves covers northern Spain and the Camino de Santiago in Series 6. In 2013, Simon Reeve presented the Pilgrimage series on BBC Two, in which he followed various pilgrimage routes across Europe, including the Camino de Santiago in Episode 2. In 2014, Lydia B. Smith and Future Educational Films released Walking the Camino, 6 Ways to Santiago, in theaters across the US and Canada. The film features the accounts and perspectives of 6 pilgrims as they navigate their respective journeys from France to Santiago de Compostela. In 2015, it was distributed across the world, playing theaters throughout Europe, Australia, and New Zealand. It recently aired on NPTV and continues to be featured in festivals relating to the spirituality, mind-body, travel, and adventure. In the 2017 movie, The Trip to Spain, the Camino de Santiago is mentioned as Rob Brydon quizzes Steve Coogan about what the Camino is and proceeds to explain what it is with a brief history of it. In 2018, Series 1 of BBC Two's Pilgrimage followed this pilgrimage. In 2025, in The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon episode El Sacrificio, Daryl Dixon visits part of the Camino de Santiago while in Spain, leaving the Rubik's Cube of his young friend Laurent there. All right, then we have various pictures from along the route, and there you go. Honestly, I just found it interesting. Thought you guys would like to know a little bit more about it and learn something as well with me. So thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget, drop a comment down below. Let us know what you'd like to hear next, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye.